Hey guys, Dr. Plague here. Has ditching your bad habit been on your to-do list for a while? Well, I'm happy to bring you today's sponsor, Fume. Fume has a great ergonomic design. It feels familiar in the hand, and it's just a lot of fun to use. It's easy too. You just slip in the cartridge, pop it in, and you're good to go. No smoke, no batteries, just a tasty blast of air whenever you need it. I'm quite partial to the mint myself, but it comes in many fun flavors. There's no cleaning, no recharging, and it's there when you need it, wherever you need it. There's no smoke, no added chemicals, and it's really just a great alternative to whatever might be holding your chain these days. Plus, it comes with this cool little magnetic base, which is just... wow, I really enjoyed it more than I thought I would. So, if you're interested in kicking your habit, go check out Fume today, and go ahead and use my code so they know that I sent you. And thanks to Fume for supporting the channel. Me, Charlie Baker, and Marcus Kennedy sat by the campfire with our Cub Scout troop. 3 best friends, all enjoying each other's company. Charlie was in the middle of one of his infamous scary stories. He was always the best storyteller. Everyone could joke that one day he would become an author or something. Gosh, if only that were true. If only he'd just made it past that night. Charlie reached the climax of his story, and we all screamed as the character of the story was attacked by an axe-wielding, goat-headed man. Then it ended, and our screams of terror turned into affirmations and applause. As usual, it was a great story. The others started to tell their scary stories. Marcus told a story about a hook-handed man nailing people to the front door. Another scout told a story about a werewolf stalking a family on the night of the full moon. But none of them matched. None of them reached the terrifying level of Charlie's story. We'd always wondered about his secret, how he'd gotten so good, but he always told us that it just came naturally to him. We didn't believe that, but it was mostly because we still hoped that we'd be as good as him someday. After a long while of sitting by the fire, I noticed Charlie slip away from the fire, exclaiming that he was tired. Not too much later, I agreed with the sentiment and retreated to our tent. It was quite a distance away from the others. I was still warm from the fire and pulled myself into my sleeping bag next to Charlie. I was out. My sleep was good, long and peaceful. That's how it should be, but it was interrupted. That night I experienced something that has haunted me to this very day. It started with me sitting up in the tent next to Charlie. I was hearing things outside, strange grunts, and what I can only describe as barking purrs. They were odd. I can't really describe it, but they almost had a bird-like quality to them. Along with the strange noises were heavy footsteps in the leaves. With every footstep, I slowly began to realize how big the thing must be. I looked around, every which way, worried about what could be outside. Bracing myself, I put a hand against the nylon wall, only to feel something press against it on the other side. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. My body, seemingly in a state of shock, wouldn't let me move. The sounds the creature was making shifted. The barking purr-like sound slowly shifted into this low, droning growl. I shook so violently I thought I might pass out. I'd never heard anything like it. There was absolutely nothing to compare it to. With this new sound came a new, horrible, overwhelming feeling. Dread. That was the feeling that came over me. It was so incredibly all-encompassing that I couldn't move. It was so immense that I felt like I was being suffocated by the emotions. But I don't even know how that's possible. It felt like I was drowning, like one of those nightmares when you're in a car slowly sinking deeper and deeper into the ocean. You know, there's nothing you can do to escape, so you just sit there and shake, dreading your inevitable death. That was the feeling that came over me in that tent. Then another sensation hit me. It wasn't a feeling, it was like something much worse, something much more physical. The smell. The putrid smell of the thing almost made me want to puke. It smelled like a massive dumpster of burning trash. But there was something else there, too. The horrible smell of something dead, something rotting. It smelled like how I'd always thought a skunk would smell. A wet, dead, horrible smell that just makes you wish to never smell again. I wanted to cover my mouth, but I was so afraid I just sat there, drowning in fear and that horrid aroma. I listened to heavy footsteps patrolling around the tent. They rustled the dry leaves and broke branches. It kept going in a concentric circle that slowly seemed to close in on the tent. Suddenly, I began to regret putting our tent so far away from the others. That afternoon, I'd convinced Charlie to help me move it farther from the others. We both liked to go to sleep early and hated being kept up by the other scouts' endless chatter. It was getting closer. Its heavy footsteps grew louder and louder. I imagined the thing growing larger and larger, seeming to feed off my fear. I shook. I wanted to be anywhere but here. I wanted to escape, to see my mom, my dad, my brothers, anyone, and anywhere but here. Then I heard things begin to drag against the nylon of the tent. It sounded scratchy and weird. It sounded similar to nails on a chalkboard, mixed with the sound of dragging your nails on a piece of nylon. The noise of the dragging on the nylon was so shrill, it stung my ears. I was so frozen with dread and fear that I couldn't do anything. I didn't reach to cover them, afraid somehow that it would know I'd moved. I felt weak. I wanted to do something, to move, to scream, but my petrified body refused. I felt lightheaded. I felt sick to my stomach. The smell, the sound, the fear, it all felt so overwhelming. It lasted hours. The whole time I felt I was on the verge of puking or screaming, but I could do nothing but sit there and listen. At some point, a light drizzle began. At first, I hoped that it might drown out the horrible sound, but it might also protect me from the unknown that I so desperately did not want to face. Instead, it just added to the cacophony of horror and terror. It felt like I was on my breaking point. I still sat there, absolutely petrified. My eyes followed the footsteps as they slowly made their way around the tent. Each heavy thump sent a shiver down my spine, reminding me of the immense size and power of whatever horrible thing was out there. That's when I heard it, the sound of ripping nylon. I looked to see something cutting through the tent wall along the zipper. Or, I don't know if cutting would be the right word. It was more like an exact rip from a cut. I looked to see what it was, but it was too dark. I watched the dark shape slowly rip further and further down until there was a gash from top to bottom of the tent. I shook so violently that I had to assume the thing or the person knew I was there. Once the large gash had been made, something dark started to make its way into the tent. I looked, but the smell intensified as it approached. The smell was so bad that my eyes watered. It was such a thick, overpowering smell that it was choking me. I felt like I could taste it, and it was horrendous. I endured through the pain of my tears and looked once more. I saw it began to come inside. It was very large, very hairy. From the small amount I could see, it looked to be a limb. It reached into the tent, seemingly being careful not to let any more of its body in. Its limb, its arms, slunk further and further in, and I almost wanted to throw up. That thing, that arm, was way too big, way too long. It could reach from the door to me without even putting its shoulder into the tent. It felt so uncanny, so wrong. It looked like something you might see in a night terror, but But the worst part was it was real. It seemed to reach around the tent, seemingly trying to find what was inside. When its arm bumped against my backpack, it grabbed hold of it with what seemed to be freakishly long fingers before slowly and eerily dragging the bag out of the tent. My fear didn't die, but gradually lessened, knowing that it was only here for that. The thing just wanted my bag. As it slowly lifted the backpack, it struggled. The large bag hardly fit through the hole. Little pieces and parts of it kept getting caught as the thing tried to yank it through. The still, omnipresent droning call was interrupted by a growl, followed by a loud rip. The bag disappeared through the now significantly larger hole. The hole flapped open and closed in the light breeze, and I could make out the massive dark shape of the creature. I looked away, horrified at the size of the thing. Silence for a split second. I listened to the thing as it rustled around with the bag, letting out slight grunts that sounded frustrated. It fiddled with the bag for an amount of time I can't determine, before it let out one especially loud grunt and a loud ripping sound, then a clatter of contents as my bag fell to the ground. I recognized all the different sounds, the thunk of my water bottle, the thump of my clothes, the crash of my utensils, the clinking crunch of a bag of chips. It fiddled around with the objects. Crack, the sound of it shattering something made me jump internally. I was still so scared of this thing. Up to this point, it hadn't actually shown any aggression. It had seemingly just been curious. But the mere thought of it breaking something changed that idea. I prayed in my head that this thing would go away. I just wanted to go back to sleep. I didn't care if it took my things or whatever. As long as it didn't hurt me, I didn't care. I listened to the shrill noise of a plastic bag of chips being torn apart. Heavy snuffling followed, and I could vaguely hear the crunching of the thing eating a chip. It ate all the other chips as slowly as it had eaten the first. It seemed to be enjoying them, taking its time with each individual delicacy. Once it was done, I felt through the ground its weight shift back towards the tent. My heart started thundering like it was a marathon runner. That temporary relief had been destroyed in a mere instant. The horrible call began to come again, and all the fear returned in full, overwhelming force. Unable to move, still, I watched helplessly as the arm forced its way back through the hole. I felt its long, wet fingers briefly brush against my sleeping bag. They were so long. They reminded me of gnarled branches or the long legs of some spider thing. The fingers seemed to examine the bag for a second before pulling it. My life flashed before my eyes. Me, a 10-year-old boy, had to consider that I might be about to die, that something that shouldn't exist was about to drag me out and kill me. I shifted slightly, petrified, imagining it pulling me out and eating me whole. It let go of my bag. I closed my eyes in relief, praying it would just leave. But the arm slowly drifted to the other sleeping bag. Charlie. I'd been so terrified that I didn't even think about him, so occupied with my own well-being that I hadn't thought of my best friend. He lay next to me, still sleeping soundly with a slight grin on his face. I wanted to do something, to say something, but I could do nothing but stare as the thing began to grab at the end of his sleeping bag. Charlie didn't shake, didn't move, didn't even react. Time seemed to freeze as its hand glided to the end of his bag. It seemed to caress the bag for a moment before it gave a big yank. I felt his weight shift about within the confines of the tent. I can't explain, though Charlie seemed to satisfy it better. It got a tight grip on the bag and began pulling him out of the tent. It was prolonged, and he was slowly pulled out 1 inch at a time. His eyes opened wide, and without moving his head, he looked towards the hand. His face became flat with terror, but like me, he was frozen in fear as it slowly pulled him outside. His fear only seemed to grow when the end of the sleeping bag disappeared beyond the rip of the tent. Gradually, more and more were pulled out. I shook as one of my best friends disappeared through a hole in the tent wall. Just before he finally disappeared, his eyes met mine. They were terrified and seemed to plead for help, for someone to save him from this horrible fate. But there was no one. Once he was completely gone, I heard shuffling and fabric ripping as the sleeping bag was shredded. I imagined some giant with long fingernails clawing away at the helpless sleeping bag, trying to get at my friend. Then the ripping sound stopped, and I heard the slight thump through the pitter-patter of rain. Then the sleeping bag was thrown into the puddle with a splash, sounding much lighter now. It was then I realized that it had ripped him out of the bag and was now taking him away. I heard heavy footsteps growing fainter and fainter before fading away entirely. Once the footsteps couldn't be heard, the sound stopped. The horrible droning sound had finally stopped. Sobs and cries escaped my mouth, which quickly turned to agonized screams. I cried out words. I can't tell you what I said. I was in such a panic that it was just a word salad of pure panic thoughts. I think I may have said monster or Charlie, but I can't be sure. I heard the yelps and screams of the other scouts in reaction to my own. I shook in the corner of my tent as I heard my leader make his way over. I heard the thunk of his boots until they stopped. He hadn't reached my tent yet, so I couldn't comprehend when he'd stopped walking. Then he gasped. The thunking turned to a slam as he sprinted the rest of the way over and peeked inside the tent, calling our names. He saw me alone and shaking, too traumatized to even speak, besides a single phrase. Charlie. It took Charlie. Good evening, everyone. It's me, Dr. Plague. I'm glad you made it to the end of the story. Thanks for stopping by. If you think you might like a little more spooky in your life, well, there should be some links popping up at the end of this to other great stories, maybe even some great playlists that you can discover. We update 7 nights a week, so there's always something new and something spooky waiting for you on the channel. If you like your spooky a little more tactile, there should be some links to Amazon down in my description, so go have a look over there. It should get you to all my latest books. Speaking of books, I've got my first horror novel, Towsy Homestead, available for purchase on Amazon. It's my first horror novel, so I'd really appreciate it if you'd go give it a look and maybe give it a buy too. If you'd like to support the channel, we have a subscription program here on YouTube, but we've also got a Patreon with lots of tiers and lots of different rewards. For example, our Spooky Skeleton contributors get their spooky 12 hours early. That's right, they get their videos at 8:30 a.m. as opposed to 8:30 p.m. Ghostly Reader tier contributors, that's a tier that's only available on Patreon, I'm afraid, get a book anytime I write one, signed and on their doorstep, hopefully in a timely manner. So, however you support the channel, whether it's monetarily or by enjoying our great videos here, thank you so much. Speaking of patrons, before we go, let's go ahead and thank them. Thanks to Sara, Unicorn Hollow, JustAmy, and Cinnamon Fox for being our spooky ghost contributors. Thanks to Shannon McGhee, Janet, Lee Kendall, Ronda J, Sue Casper, Valinar, CleoHarperReturns, Sara, and Queen Sheebah for being our spooky skeleton contributors. And thanks to Oh Snap, Winter, Xaronan, Stephanie Carrington, Tyler Parker, Grim Reaper, TomBoiTopUwU, Queen Sheebah, MissNewBooty, and Alex Connor for being our Ghostly Reader tier contributors. Thanks, everyone. We just couldn't do the show without you. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.